The Macedonian struggle ended up in a stalemate. Historically, mostly Bulgaria and Greece tried to influence the Ottoman region to go to their side, which after the First Balkan War was divided as such, where later Bulgaria lost most of the region. However, what if Bulgaria had actually won the Macedonian struggle and ended up getting the entire region? I think that this would kill Bulgaria's chances at collaborating with the Serbians and Greeks in a potential future Balkan war against the Ottomans, so we could see this to never happen. Let me show you what I came up with. The Macedonian struggle wasn't a conventional war, but rather a mix of guerrilla warfare, propaganda, assassinations, church influences, and ethnic rivalries. It was fought mostly between Bulgarian-backed revolutionaries and Greek-backed militias, although Serbs, Albanians, and surprisingly Romanians had minor involvement in there as well, while the Turks there wanted to uphold the status quo. To explain it really simply, the Macedonian struggle was answering the question of who gets Macedonia when the Ottoman Empire inevitably collapses, so it was a proxy war between Bulgarians and Greeks in the region. I made this ethnic map of the country, the sources would be in the description, where as you can see it was ethnically mixed with Slavs, Greeks, Albanians, Vlachs, Turks and also Jews. The region is politically strategic, it's rich in natural resources, mountainous, which makes it easy to defend and was seen as the final prize in the Balkan Peninsula. As I mentioned, it was claimed by multiple states, especially Greece and Bulgaria, who both saw it as theirs historically and culturally. Now let me break down this complex map, making it easier to understand. In green you have the Macedonian Slavs, which are considered as closely linked to Bulgarians. Most of them were Christian Orthodox, but dark shade is Muslims. Next up you have the Turkish nationals, which were settled mostly along the Varda river and parts of northern Greece, and with a lighter shade is Christian Orthodox Turks, and a similar color is the Roma people. You also have the Greeks and the darker shade is Muslim Greeks. There is also the Albanians, with a very few of them being Christians, represented by the lighter color. Finally you have the Serbs to the north, Jews only in Thessaloniki, and Vlachs, which are basically Romanians, scattered throughout the region. So this is the ethnic map broken down, just so you know what we're working with. The Bulgarian position backed the IMRO, which is the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, a group of revolutionaries fighting for Macedonian autonomy or union with Bulgaria. They mostly use guerrilla tactics, sabotage and local recruitment to gain influence. The Ilinden Preobrazhenie uprising of 1903 was a massive anti-Ottoman rebellion led by the IMRO. While it was crushed brutally by the Ottomans, it made Macedonia a hot topic across Europe, as almost everybody knew that war would erupt over the region. Greece's position was different than that of Bulgaria, where they were worried that Bulgaria would claim all of Macedonia and wanted to prevent this, seeing the region as an integral part of Greece and the Greek civilization. As a response to the Bulgarian-backed IMRO, Greece organized the Hellenic Macedonian Committee and sent Greek officers and volunteers, called Makedonomachoi, to support Greek-speaking villages and fight the IMRO. These two proxies fought mostly against each other and only briefly paused in 1918, where they fought together against the Turks. As I said, the Serbs, Albanians and Romanians had some influence there, with the Macedono-Romanian Cultural Society holding a lot of influence and preserving peace for the Romanian villages, that the Greeks and Bulgarians had mostly left alone and fought each other instead. As these two were the biggest and most influential groups, I would focus mostly on them. This proxy war was brutal, as villages would often shift allegiance depending on which side would hold the guns. Armed bands would commit massacres, assassinations and raids, and this was done by both sides. Put it simply, it was pure anarchy. The Ottomans tried to suppress both sides, but lacked any real control over the territory, as the Ottomans were in a clear decline and later were fighting Italy in Libya. So, not a lot of resources were spared to preserve control over the dumpster fire that was the Macedonian region. The most important thing I want you to know about the Macedonian struggle and what I would use for my point of divergence is that local priests and school teachers were often the first targets of Greek and Bulgarian bands, trying to kill them and replace them with somebody more favorable. This was done since language and religion defined identity, or at least this is what the Balkan countries had claimed. Basically, a Bulgarian band would go to a Greek village, remove the local priests and school teachers and replace them with Bulgarian ones. Then they can claim that this village is part of the Bulgarian church and that they speak Bulgarian, and vice versa. This was done to the Bulgarian villages as well, but by the Greek side. As you can imagine, with the mess that is the ethnic map of Macedonia, most people spoke often more than one language, so dividing up the region would become really tense regarding who gets these bilingual villages, hence why the church and schools were so important. Most of the conflict was the Bulgarian Exarchate versus the Greek Patriarchate. A religious alignment meant national loyalty. In 1908, 5 years after all of what I just said had been ongoing, the Young Turk Revolution succeeded and only temporarily restored Ottoman constitutional rule and cracked down on the armed bands, ending the worst of the fighting. But the Macedonian question remained unsolved, setting the stage for the First Balkan War, where Macedonia was divided by force between Greece, Serbia and Bulgaria, also even so partially Albania as well. Even after Macedonia was divided, this Macedonian struggle period fueled long-term hostility between Greece and Bulgaria. Even though nobody won it decisively, it was still partitioned. The amount of ethnic violence between Greeks and Bulgarians there is something that you cannot even imagine. Now you may say that I'm going to be biased for Bulgaria, since the narrative of the video is very much so pro-Bulgarian, so this is why just a Balkan historian has also uploaded the same video as me, but he would be doing a scenario where Greece would win the Macedonian struggle instead, and even Videntis has joined us as well, where he would be doing Serbia winning the Macedonian struggle and getting access to the Aegean Sea, but likely alienating the Greeks and Bulgarians as allies. I would remind you to check out their videos after this one is over. So, how do we make Bulgaria win the Macedonian struggle? As you can see, despite most of the people in the region having pledged allegiance to Bulgaria, we didn't get too much out of the region in the end. So Bulgaria getting the entire region would be tricky, but I have a clever idea. Historically, the IMRO, which is the Bulgarian proxy in Macedonia, was split between Autonomists and pro-Bulgarian annexationists. Basically, one side wanted for Macedonia to just be annexed into Bulgaria, but the position of the Autonomists is more interesting, and the reason this scenario may actually work. Let me roll the clock back to 1879, where the Treaty of San Stefano was signed, where with the Russian backing, Bulgaria was established and crowned the Russian Tsar's nephew as their king, Alexander Battenberg. This absolutely freaked out the rest of the great powers, especially France and Britain, since they feared that this Russian puppet state would have access to the Mediterranean Sea, something that Britain has tried to prevent for centuries. As such, the Treaty of Berlin was signed 3 months after the one of San Stefano, where Bulgaria's size was limited greatly, with the great powers wanting to limit the influence of Russia and keep the Ottomans in check, so the balance of power is still kept up. I mention all of this because this is why the autonomist wing of the IMRO wanted to be sort of independent as a pro-Bulgarian state, rather than for them to be integrated into Bulgaria. They just knew that the great powers wouldn't allow for Bulgaria to get Macedonia and dominate the Balkans, as they had previously not allowed for this to happen. As such, this part of the IMRO thought that their best shot would be to create a multi-ethnic Macedonian state that would be very friendly towards Bulgaria, but not part of them. For the purpose of this alternate history, the autonomous faction would win easily, aligning their goals with a Bulgarian-led autonomous Macedonia. An added benefit for this is that not only the great powers cannot interfere in the Balkans too much, but this would also appease more of the non-Slavic locals, including Vlachs and moderate Albanians. On paper they would not be part of Bulgaria, but be their own country instead, so if they are not going to support the IMRO, they are at least not going to oppose them, as the Ottoman hatred in the Balkans was reaching an all-time high. How exactly we have the autonomous faction to come out on top is difficult to name precisely, but it wouldn't be too unrealistic, as the founding members of the IMRO were mostly in favor of autonomy, such as Goce Delchev and Dame Gruev. If they managed to eliminate or suppress the pro-annexationist faction decades before the Macedonian struggle had started, then this would help our scenario greatly. With this move, the IMRO has gained control of the majority of the Macedonian population's loyalty, but I think that we can do even better. It would really be helpful if we avoid alienating the local population with the IMRO's occasional brutality, as they were acting more so as a terrorist group, rather than freedom fighters. Most of their actions were unjustifiable, and they had wanted to rule Macedonia by loyalty and forced by terror, so preventing their brutality would help more non-Bulgarians in the region want to work with them, or at least not oppose them. I think that these minor changes would result in the narrative of the video being achieved down the line, because the way my pro-Bulgarian biased brain sees it, we have created a domino effect in favor of Bulgaria getting the territory. The IMRO would now be more popular and less brutal, so they can dominate the armed struggle. Basically, weapons were scarce in the region, and sometimes people resorted to literally using sticks and stones to fight each other. With the IMRO being more trustworthy, Albanian and Romanian communities would help them ever so slightly, and Bulgaria and Romania can fund these rebels, which would be fighting for the same idea, an independent Macedonian state that is pro-Bulgarian. It would be helpful if the IMRO manages to secure international backing or at least neutrality, which I think they could achieve considering how they are not in favor of being annexed into Bulgaria and may actually publicly denounce it, which would calm down the great powers. The final thing I would have the IMRO do as to maximize their odds of success would be for them to leverage the collapse of the Ottoman authority in the region way before Greece and Serbia can do this. And this is important because the timing for the IMRO was very bad historically, hence why Bulgaria got so little of the region after the First Balkan War. In this alternate history, the IMRO would launch coordinated campaigns against Greek paramilitaries in southern Macedonia, around Kastoria and Furina. If the IMRO successfully manages to secure these two checkpoints, then it would be really difficult for the Greeks to get any influence north of that, down the line making the IMRO the dominant faction in Macedonia. Another fight that would be waged is over schools and religion. As I mentioned earlier, this was really important, so I want to go back to the ethnic map. Here we have Macedonian Christians and Muslims, and the Serbians to the north, but this color represents Macedonians being part of the Serbian church, rather than the Bulgarian one. There is a similar situation in Greece, where the Greek church had ruled over some Macedonian Slavs, rather than the Bulgarian church. The IMRO would focus on containing these as much as possible, promoting church values and getting the patriarchate aligned villages by offering them protection and education. This would secure the IMRO a lot of influence, as they would be supported by even more non-Slavs. By the year of 1908, the Young Turk Revolution would still happen, where they would brutally crack down on the Macedonian struggle, so having it fail or be delayed ever so slightly would be perfect for this scenario. The problem is that this would be very unrealistic, as we have changed nothing for the Young Turks not to come to power, so their rise would become inevitable. The 1909 coup attempt in Constantinople would likely occupy much of their attention for the time being, and if we are being optimistic, the IMRO could succeed in their mission by this point. Do they have plot armor? Absolutely. Is this realistic? Absolutely not. In this alternate history, the 1909 coup attempt in the Ottoman Empire would be slightly more brutal, as Abdulhamid II would attempt to restore his absolute rule and gather Islamist supporters to his cause, occupying the attention of the Young Turks for the time being. Ottoman garrisons in Macedonia would pull back, creating a power vacuum in the region. This would allow for the IMRO to seize control of key towns like Bitula, Veles and Skopje, and then they would declare autonomy within the Ottoman Empire, which move would be backed by Bulgaria. The timing in this alternate history would be just perfect, as the Young Turks wanted to introduce more liberal constitution and restore the Ottoman parliament. So if they were to crack down on the IMRO, then their claims at trying to improve and free the empire from oppression would be dismissed. As a result of that, I think that the hand of the Young Turks is tight for them to accept giving autonomy to Macedonia. Russia would remain very friendly to Bulgaria and pressure Serbia to back off and accept this Macedonian autonomy. Austria-Hungary sees autonomous Macedonia as a buffer state for Serbian expansion, to which the Austrians would approve, seeking to contain their Balkan rival. France and Britain would be distracted by colonial issues and wouldn't block this Macedonian autonomy, as they are still part of the Ottoman Empire, which is now more seen as an internal issue. Let us say that in the year of 1910, the IMRO establishes an autonomous Macedonian state under Bulgarian influence, feuding their usual whack. Officially, Macedonia is part of the Ottoman Empire, like Bulgaria was before 1908, but de facto it's independent. For the case of Bulgaria, even though they were officially independent only in 1908, before that they still had their own currency, laws, constitution, leader and so on. Just on paper they were part of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, technically, Egypt up until 1914 was also part of the Ottoman Empire, and Britain had officially annexed it when the two countries were at war during the Great War in 1914. To put it simply, Ottoman control over Macedonia would be about as much as their control over Egypt in 1910. Remember that historically in the Italo-Turkish War of 1911 to 1912, the Ottomans needed to resupply Libya via Egypt, but the British wanted to be neutral, so they didn't allow the Ottomans to send large forces via Egypt, and the Brits feared that this would destabilize their puppet state there. As such, the Ottoman forces going through Egypt as to reach Libya and fight the Italians there were disguised as civilians, took trains to Alexandria as tourists, and rode camels in a convoy to reach Libya. As you can see, Ottoman control over Egypt was basically non-existent by this point. Even if de jure it was part of their empire, de facto it was British, and Macedonia is much like that. They are basically independent in the year of 1910. I can see them to use the Bulgarian language mostly, but other minority languages are to be added as to not alienate them, while the Macedonian state would use the Bulgarian exarchate, receive Bulgarian trained military officers, but most importantly I can see them using the Bulgarian currency, at least for the time being. Now let me show you this Bulgarian currency, because I happen to own some precisely from the year of 1910, which is these 3 coins, and from 1906 these ones were also used, as they were of smaller denomination. As you can see on the back of these larger coins you have the face of Tsar Ferdinand, but in Cyrillic the text is really important as it translates to Ferdinand I, Tsar of the Bulgarians. Further, I have this 5 leva coin from 1894, which is a larger denomination, and on the side of the coin it translates to God save Bulgaria. This would be something really subtle, as to show that Macedonia is more so a Bulgarian puppet state, rather than an independent country, as they would use the currency that mentions Bulgaria in such an obvious way. Regarding the question of currency, since I'm Bulgarian, I can share something that I know that you would find interesting. Bulgaria gained their independence in 1879, but their first coins ever made were from 1881, and I have them right here. For about 1.5 years, Bulgaria was independent without their own currency, so you may ask which one they used until then. The answer is that Bulgaria used pretty much anything that they could find, with some sources stating that they used currencies from countries that no longer existed, such as Indian and Persian states, but also the Russian currency was also used in Bulgaria. As a curious fact, the French currency was also used by the government as to collect taxes, take and pay off any debts. For Macedonia, a similar anarchy of currency may also ensue. The government is likely to use the French currency as well, but the people are going to use anything that they could get their hands on until a Macedonian currency is created, which is a process that would take a year or more. I think that Macedonia is going to be part of the Latin Monetary Union, which to put it simply is an agreement that all countries in this monetary union would use the same proportions and materials for their coins. For example, this coin is from Greece from 1832 and has the same size and silver amount as this Bulgarian coin from 1882. This French coin is from 1870 and it has the same size and silver amount as this Serbian coin from 1915 and so on. Yes, Macedonia in the transition period is also going to use Serbian currencies to the north and Greek currencies to the south, depending on the ethnicity of the people, but mostly it would be Bulgarian coins, and this is a big deal. Bulgaria will directly control an overwhelming majority of the currency in Macedonia, giving them an immense soft power over the nation, further pushing them closer towards official subjugation. As a response to that, Greece and Serbia would obviously protest this diplomatically, but wouldn't risk a war with Bulgaria just yet. Serbia wanted Macedonia and claimed that to them it was more valuable than Bosnia, and this is because Serbia had really nowhere else to expand, due to facing stronger enemies on each side. The Greeks would obviously want to protect the Greek minority there, but also as I mentioned earlier, Macedonia was a historic province of Greece, and the Megalia idea by 1910 was just starting to get really popular in Greece, so even though the Macedonian struggle was won by Bulgaria, it doesn't end all hostilities. And further, I would argue the opposite, the worst is yet to come. As you can imagine, there would be big consequences with such an obvious pro-Bulgarian state being created, as Bulgaria now becomes a regional power stretching from the Danube to the Albanian frontier. The balance of power in the Balkans would now be completely thrown out of the window. With Macedonia solved in Bulgaria's favor, the 1912 Balkan League may never form, and this is a huge deal that would make this scenario really complicated. Historically, the Balkan League was formed between all of these countries and they successfully fought the Ottomans, with Bulgaria, Serbia and Greece hoping to get as much of Macedonia as possible. With Bulgaria in this alternate history now getting the entire region, although unofficially any Balkan collaboration against the Ottomans I see as very unlikely. In fact, what I can see most likely happening is that Serbia, Greece and Montenegro would decide to strike Bulgaria instead of the Ottoman Empire, so I'm going to split the scenario into 2 parts. The first option is that this war really gets carried out and Bulgaria could have the advantage against the Balkan League, but a Romanian entry into the war is also possible, while the Ottomans joining is not impossible as well, but I doubt it. Basically, by this point the Ottomans would have suffered yet another coup that deposed the Young Turks and put the Liberal Party of the Ottoman Empire back in charge. This makes me think that due to timing, the Ottomans wouldn't intervene, plus they were already beaten badly by the Italians. If it all unfolds like this, then I can see Bulgaria to lose this war, just like how they did in the Second Balkan War historically. The pressure is just too great. If this were to happen, then Bulgaria would get partitioned and look similar to how they looked after the Second Balkan War. But since the First Balkan War never happened, Bulgaria still doesn't control much of Thrace. Further, with a Balkan War against the Ottomans not happening in this alternate history, and instead these states would be attacking Bulgaria, the Ottomans still has plenty of possessions in the Balkans, namely a huge exclave in Albania. Greece, Serbia and Montenegro going in against the Ottomans is possible, but then Bulgaria would just join their side, so it's a risk that the Balkan League is perhaps not willing to take, leaving us with these borders at the start of the Great War. One major change is that the Ottoman Empire is still led by the Liberal Party, rather than the authoritarian CUP and Enver Pasha. This means that the Ottoman entry into the Great War on the side of the Central Powers is much more uncertain, and likely they would like to remain neutral, or they wouldn't join the war for a while, as the Liberal Party originally wanted to work with Britain, while the CUP was very much pro-Central Powers. I already made a video on this topic regarding the Ottomans being neutral in the Great War, so you can check it out if this is what you want to continue watching as the first ending, as now I'm not going to continue it. Basically, what has happened in this alternate history is that Bulgaria would still join the Central Powers, and Serbia perhaps capitulate, as the war as a whole would end in the same way, but the Ottoman Empire is likely not involved. Bulgaria is likely stripped of further territories in the Balkans and being drastically weaker than today, while the Ottomans would be still standing, although Albania getting their independence as a pro-Ottoman state is quite likely. The Thrace region, also known as the Zagorje region, is going to remain within the Ottoman Empire for a while, as Bulgaria has no real way to get it, despite the local people being about 80% ethnically Bulgarian. To put it simply, this first ending where Bulgaria is partitioned after winning the Macedonian Struggle I think is quite boring, as Bulgaria was similarly partitioned after the Second Balkan War, but here they would be even weaker in this alternate history, and it would mostly merge with our history. Now I would say that this indeed is the most realistic ending, so if you're looking for something realistic, you can stop watching here, as the second ending is going to be much more unrealistic than that, but I find it more entertaining as well. For the purpose of this video, I want to give you a second ending that has more drastic changes, and it's not like the first one where it mirrored our history, but with a weaker Bulgaria. I would rewind before the alternate First Balkan War, where you would have the Balkan League to still get formed, but it would include Bulgaria as well. Why exactly? Well, I cannot tell you, this is going to be absolutely unrealistic, but hey, I already gave you a plausible ending, so why not have a fun with this one? Perhaps the Balkan states still heavily dislike the Ottomans and want to expand into their territories, while this autonomous Macedonia is more neutral and not just an extension of the Bulgarian mainland, calming the Serbs and Greeks. This alternate First Balkan War is going to be much more different than historically, as Bulgaria and Macedonia would cut away Serbia and Greece from expanding eastwards into the Ottoman Empire, only allowing them to take Albania and the surrounding areas, while Bulgaria has free reign over Thrace and even Constantinople. Seeing this outcome, I hope that you're starting to understand why the first ending happened and why I think it's the most realistic, as Greece and Serbia would have more to gain if they fight Bulgaria instead of the Ottomans, but I would continue with this unrealistic scenario. Inevitably, the Ottomans are defeated just like historically, the Liberal Party is deposed and the CUP establishes a dictatorship, while the Ottoman lands would be greatly partitioned along these lines. The great powers in Bulgaria may demand the creation of an Albanian state, but Serbia and Greece are absolutely going to oppose this. Serbia wanted northern Albania because there were plenty of Christians there, in addition to it giving sea access to Serbia, which Austria-Hungary, their rival, absolutely wanted to prevent as to keep Serbia small and weak. For the purpose of this already unrealistic video, I would have Albania to be created like historically, but it would be somewhat smaller, as Greece and Serbia would take a bit more land from them. Naturally, Bulgaria and Albania would have the same enemies, so an alliance between the two is inevitable, and would happen as soon as possible. Now, as you can see, Serbia and Greece are drastically weaker, with Serbia being about half the size and population of what they were when they got Macedonia, and this is a big deal. Historically, Bulgaria started the Second Balkan War as to gain more of Macedonia, which backfired greatly as more nations got involved, leading to the Bulgarian partition in the first national catastrophe. In this alternate history, however, there is no need for Bulgaria to start the Second Balkan War, as they already got more than what they had dreamt of, but Greece, Serbia and Montenegro may decide to launch an invasion of Bulgaria. Again, let me remind you that if this is done and more countries get involved, then Bulgaria is partitioned regardless, giving us exactly the same borders as historically just before the start of the Great War, but Albania is slightly smaller, so even if this is the second most realistic outcome to happen in the second ending, it again gives us what happened historically, so let me give you a secret third ending where Bulgaria would do very well. Assuming that no such war happens, in the summer of 1914 the Great War will start like historically, but Bulgaria has managed to keep all of their territories. With the outbreak of the war, I can see Bulgaria to officially annex Macedonia under some pretext of protecting the people from the war, but in reality it would be done just because all of the great powers would be busy and nobody could really oppose this move by Bulgaria. Now, as the war would escalate, Bulgaria likely remains a neutral state, as they already have what they want, and sure, the Entente could promise them Constantinople, or the Central Powers could promise them the Niš province and Constanța from Romania, but these are minor territories compared to the risk that Bulgaria would have to take in joining the largest conflict that humanity has ever seen thus far. I think that under these circumstances, Bulgaria would want to remain neutral and consolidate their country, while Serbia is never capitulated by the Austrians like historically. However, in this alternate history, Serbia is about half the size and population, so they may still fall to the Austrians due to them not being to put up so much for resistance. And historically, Serbia mobilized about 30% of their entire population, so to have the same amount of soldiers in this alternate history as historically, they would have to mobilize 50% of their population, which is going to become too impossible. To put it simply, Serbia would be screwed, their nation would be destroyed, and they would suffer a lot of casualties that they cannot ever recover. Of course, the Entente would inevitably win this conflict, perhaps a bit sooner due to the Central Powers being ever so slightly weaker, but then we would have the same borders in Europe, more or less. Now, assuming that this is the case, in the interwar period, the Ottoman Empire would still be crumbling, and we can assume that Greece would still launch their campaigns as would try to take the Aegean coast. But since the Greek nation is considerably smaller and potentially weaker, they could still fail and the Turks would win their war of independence. Albania's borders could be restored by the great powers, especially since Yugoslavia had expanded so much. So we would have these borders in Europe by the 1920s in the interwar period. Now the Balkans are a bit more balanced, with Romania, Yugoslavia and Greece siding together against Albania and Bulgaria, potentially Turkey as well. I would still assume that there is no war in the Balkans in the interwar period, because again, if Bulgaria loses, then we simply have the historical timeline. Yugoslavia, I bet, would be very much altered, let me tell you why. The Serbian portion tried to dominate Yugoslavia in the interwar period, where they had a narrow majority thanks to the Macedonians siding with them. Here in this alternate Yugoslavia, the Serbian portion is far weaker, and the minorities would hold most of the power and population. This either collapses Yugoslavia and Croatia tries to break free in 1929, leading to Slovenia to do the same, or Yugoslavia just becomes really dysfunctional in the interwar period, where historically they were still very underdeveloped, but here it could be even worse. I want to touch upon the Second World War, where as you can see the Balkan states would not be collaborating together against the greater threat, so I can see them to get conquered by Germany and forced into the Axis, or perhaps this doesn't happen. It is said that Germany only consolidated the Balkans because they wanted to aid Italy in their war against Greece. Now in this alternate history the Greeks are more battered and bruised and about half of their original size, so maybe, just maybe, Mussolini manages to do something about this. If this is the case, then Yugoslavia and Bulgaria would not be invaded in the Second World War, with Germany preferring to strike the Soviet Union first. Then Operation Barbarossa is potentially launched a bit sooner, giving Germany an early advantage, and I wouldn't be surprised if they actually managed to win the Battle of Stalingrad, but it would be inevitable for Germany to lose the Second World War again. But the key difference is that Yugoslavia and Bulgaria would remain kingdoms and likely side with the West in the Cold War, so Bulgaria would get to preserve all of their borders into the modern day, being almost double their original size. Yugoslavia, however, due to their earlier mentioned problems, possibly still collapses, leading to some semblance of these borders and a far weaker and smaller Serbia. Now another alternative is that Mussolini just sucks and cannot invade Greece successfully, requiring German support, which quickly collapses Yugoslavia and Bulgaria sides with the Axis willingly. Still, the Axis are going to be defeated as we have changed nothing except a slightly larger Bulgaria, so the Soviet Union would still puppet the country and bring them into their sphere. Either Bulgaria keeps all of their border territories as a Soviet satellite state, which gets us the previous scenario after the collapse of communism, but Bulgaria is not a kingdom anymore, or they would be slightly reduced in size, where Bulgaria gives up parts of Macedonia to Greece, as the Soviets would like to try and make Greece communist in their following civil war, but also Bulgaria could be forced to give up bordering towns to Turkey, just so the Soviets are not so close to Istanbul, which the West would want to reduce tensions. This Bulgaria would survive the Cold War and turn into the modern day Bulgaria we have today, but their acceptance into NATO and the European Union could be a bit more challenging, with Greece vetoing some of these proposals. In the end, I believe that if we are fairly realistic that Bulgaria winning the Macedonian Struggle likely results in a worse two endings for them I showed earlier, where the First Balkan War is initiated on them rather on the Ottomans, making them lose plenty of land and not getting any Ottoman territories. So surprisingly, by Bulgaria getting Macedonia in 1910, it realistically results in a worst outcome for them, while a surprisingly positive outcome for the Ottomans. Thank you for watching this video, and I would recommend you check out these two videos by Just a Greek Historian and Videntis regarding their takes on the Macedonian struggle. I wish you the best day possible and goodbye.